inside my head. I try to turn it down, but I can't quite drown it out.
Hey, welcome and thank you for joining us today. You're listening to Society Bites Radio, and I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer.
And I'm CHERI HIMMER, and this is Authentically You, social interaction for the mind and soul.
For the next 25 minutes, we talk about healing and growth from the inside out. Remember, you are 100% responsible for your happiness, joy, and well-being. So we'd like to welcome you all from our new digs in Texas. We moved in 3 days ago, and we're actually still got books all around us. We have workers outside. So if perchance we get interrupted, we're just going to go with the flow and keep moving on. So CHERI, if you need to go,
so if
go.
painters just paint around us or whatever, or landscapers, if you hear any clanking, it's because we've got, a bobcat working out in the front yard and spreading dirt. But we're super excited because I just wanted to talk about being responsible for your happiness, joy, and well-being. When you're in the process of making a big change in your life, I think it's easier to think about building a house as being you make it what you want, and you're making choices, and you're responsible for those choices, and yet at the same time you have to make compromises. That's one thing this is our second time of building a house, is that you can't get stuck on the perfectionist idea of building a house. That can really trap you, and you have to be able to, okay, this is what I expected or hoped for, but it may not be entirely the way I wanted, but I can make it be something good, if that makes sense.
Well, so you mean like the bookcases?
Yeah. So we've built these beautiful, going up 10 feet high bookcases in Dr. Himmer's office here, and we have some in the great room as well, and we're trying to tweak things and figure out things so they'll hold the massive amount of books that you have, your collection, and the weight of that, and it's not exactly as we perceived.
Well, I think the odd thing was that I perceived that bookcases were built for books, and you seem to have a different opinion on what bookcases were used for.
Okay, you're ruining my analogy here.
Oh, sorry.
You're ruining my analogy about just the whole idea of when you're building something, whatever it is, and I want you to think about building your happiness, joy, and well-being.
Building your identity, building your life.
Yeah, it's like you've got this expectation, you have this design, but there's going to be tweaks along the way. And so you can't let perfectionism paralyze you and have that expectation paralyze you. You've got to move forward, and you've got to take what's given you and work with it.
If I heard you right, and this is yesterday's clients, all four of them had a common theme, and that was acceptance. Just learning to live in a world called acceptance, because if you don't, the resistance is going to catch up with you, the negative energy is going to catch up with you, and we've defined this before, but it's really important to understand. Acceptance is the ability to channel energy around or through the body and mind instead of collecting it like a reservoir. In other words, as we're going through this process, and keep in mind, we've been broadcasting this all through the selling of our home, or the staging, the selling of our home, all the stuff we had to get rid of. This is 34 years of collected items in one area, which is the Gig Harbor area. And now we've transferred everything down to Georgetown, Texas. And that whole accompanying process was nothing but acceptance. Okay, we've got rid of all of my motorcycles, all of your kayaks, 5 of our 6 bicycles.
Yeah, you're just shedding stuff.
Just moving all of these things, plus our furniture, etc. And we're kind of starting over. And it's been really, for me, it's been an experience in acceptance from the standpoint of, can I still move on having everything different? We've got 3 decades of patterns, of habits established. Now we're going on. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to move to how do you live a principle-based life? And what's the difference between a principle and an application? Because I'm hoping what the listener will notice is this story that we're going to tell you about a gal named Betsy is applicable to you in every facet of your life. We just went through a lot of drama. Yesterday my client goes, so how many traders did you bring? Did you bring 2? Did you bring 3? I said, no, we got it all into one. Now it was quite a puzzle. We played Tetris with everything, but it worked. So we want to share with you today.
There are things that are broken. I mean, so that's like one of those things.
Yeah, the first thing off the thing was my very expensive bicycle.
And
it was broken.
You pack things and you expect them to come in whole pieces, and then you have some things that come out damaged, and you have to accept the damage in the process of change. I guess that's a really good
It's my fault.
Analogy is that there are going to be some things that get tweaked in a way that you don't want them to be, and then you've got to work around that and keep going.
So today's topic is principles versus applications. There is a difference between the two. And to give you a backdrop of how this even came about, I've often talked about living a principle-based life, and most of the clients that I talk to will agree that the words that I said make sense to them, but the whole context does not. It doesn't make sense to them to say live a principle-based life. And the reason is, I argue that we don't really know what principles are, and we don't know how to work inside of a principle. So by definition, a principle is not a call to action. Cheri's going to read the definition of a principle.
And this is the thing, is that we go and we hear about principles, and then it confuses us. But it is a focus that raises our awareness. So a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior for a chain of reasoning.
Or for a chain of reasoning.
Yeah,
right?
So it's really the reasoning behind the behavior.
Right.
It is universal in application and can be repeatedly applied in similar situations to achieve goals or overcome challenges. It means it applies at home, it applies at work, it applies at school, it applies with the people that you meet randomly on the street or at the grocery store.
It applies in Washington, it applies in Texas, it applies in Florida, it applies in India, China, Africa, Switzerland. It doesn't matter where you are or when you are. A principle is applicable. Today's principle we're going to talk about is love, because it's universal.
Right.
And I want to, and this is really where, I've told the story before, when I had this couple sit in front of me and say, Dr. Himmer, thank you for the work you've done. It was a couple that I was working on for their marriage, and the husband looked at me and said, I love my wife, but we're going to get a divorce. And the wife says, yeah, I love my husband, well, we're going to get a divorce. Now, it was amicable, which was positive, but then it bears the question, what does love mean? Do you really love? Can you even fall out of love? You have to fall in love first. So anyway, these are the ideas that keep going through my mind as I was talking to these people. So here's our story. Betsy was traveling the 90-minute drive to her daughter Alyssa's house again, as she does every 2 weeks to help out with the grandchildren. Alyssa's husband travels out of state every other weekend, and she works on weekends. So Grandma Betsy gladly steps in to care for the children twice a month. So let's set this up. You've got Betsy, who's the grandma. Her daughter is Alyssa. Alyssa's husband is gone every other weekend. And so what Betsy does is she travels down to help out her daughter and to be with her grandchildren. She does that every other week.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on this particular trip, her mind was caught up on something that she had heard the previous week in church from her minister. He was teaching on the topic of charity, the pure love of Christ. Her preacher had a way of elevating the emotions when he spoke on the scriptures, and Sunday was a classic. It wasn't the delivery or the topic that had her mind running so fast. It was the lack of clarity behind the message.
Has this ever happened to you?
Yeah, like you really get caught up in the moment of like you feel someone's passion, but you come out sometimes feeling confused. The passion's great, and it causes you to focus, but it doesn't necessarily explain.
I wrote this way because this has happened to me. I've been in many a church meeting or an organizational meeting, but we're using church as the topic today. And they talk on a topic that everybody assumes they know about, love. And that's why I chose love. It is probably as misunderstood as anything I know of.
It can seem very ambiguous, and it gets misused as well.
Right, in the name of love. And I'll cover this.
Yeah.
In the name of love, how many misdeeds have been done to other people? Betsy's been attending church her entire life, and she has heard countless sermons on the topic of love. Perhaps for the first time this past Sunday, she listened and found herself questioning the meaning behind the message, or even the word. In the name of love, how many teenagers rebel against their loving parents?
Right.
In the name of love, how many young girls lose their virginity to their boyfriend with the leveraging statement, if you love me, you'll let me? Now, is that love?
Yeah.
And so that's more rhetorical than anything.
Right.
How many people have done this? Have they leveraged this term love? I've even heard parents say, and this has been recent, if you love me, you'll do the dishes. Well, let's think about that just for a second.
If you love me, you'll just do what I ask.
Is that neutral?
Unquestioning. Yeah.
Is that an inviting place to be? Is love something you want?
Well, then the word starts to feel unsafe. And we're not just talking about the word. We really want to unzip the principle of love.
I have a client, or had a client, this is years ago. I think I shared this once before. All through the night, starting at 3 a.m. in the morning, my text messages started going off, my cell phone. Now I had it off. But when I got up in the morning and I looked at it, there were 30 or 40 messages from this particular mother. Now what had happened is the son had copied all the text messages back and forth. She went off on him like a Roman candle during the middle of the night. And at the end she says, I love you, son. When I met with him a week later, he told me every time she tells me she loves me, it triggers me. It's like PTSD. It's hard to take because I don't know what's going to happen next.
So collusionary, because I'm sure she does love her son.
In her way, yeah.
Right, and wants to send that feeling, but right. She's sending the opposite. She's getting the opposite of what she wants.
Yeah, so we use the term love as a cover. How many times have parents said to their children, I love you, and then they chastise them, and they chew them out if the child goes missing or they're late on their curfew, and they're worried about it.
Okay, but and just for argument's sake, then what does tough love feel like? Does tough love feel warm and snuggly, or does tough love sometimes hurt?
Yeah, the assumption is that love has to be warm and snuggly, and it doesn't.
Right, this is where it gets so convoluted because love often feels restrictive.
Okay. And by the time this is over, I'm going to give 3 clear definitions of the principle of love. We're going to walk through the application of love, and then we're going to walk through the results of love. And so that's what we're doing, is we're dividing these principles into applications and results to help bring clarity to the story.
So this is where Betsy was in her confusion. In the name of God, she thought, how many people have been killed, tortured, and ruined? Betsy was having this philosophical discussion in her mind. It was a conflict-laden battle between 2 sides. Her traditional conservative side supported her religious leaders in faith. Love is the most important thing in the world. Her contrarian side questioned the validity of that idea, arguing that in the name of love, so much carnage and pain has been inflicted on others. There just didn't seem to be a balance for her.
It wasn't that she didn't believe in the message of love, and nor do I. I believe in the message of love. But when I hear people use the term love, I will tell you, my red flags go up. I go on alert.
Like, what do they really mean?
What is their definition of love? And are they acting in a principle-based, or are they acting in an application-based? And this will, I hope, bring clarity to it in a minute. Betsy remembered reading a story of Dr. Stephen Covey being questioned after a seminar by a man whose marriage was broken. The man explained that he and his wife don't share those kinds of feelings, meaning love, for each other anymore. So, he concluded, that means we probably don't love each other and there's nothing I can do. So stop for just a second. That's a cognitive distortion, number 1. It's an assumption, and he's got a negative bias. So what we did is just name what was going on, and there's definitely a shadow going on. It's lurking behind. So, continue.
Yeah, so Dr. Covey told him, well then, love her. Well, how's that possible, the man asked. How do you love when you don't love?
So, my friend, Covey replied, love is a verb. Love, the feeling, is a fruit of love, the verb, and I would call that a result, right? So love her. Serve her,